Welcome to A Leader's Journey, the podcast for leaders who deeply believe there is a better way to lead and desire to create their unique journey towards becoming a legacy leader. I'm your host, Shannon Hammond. Over the last 20 years as a corporate leader and leadership performance coach, I've learned that many leaders believe there is a predefined path they have to follow and struggle leaning into their unique gifts that will create lasting impact and fulfillment. They end up feeling stuck, unhappy, and unfulfilled in the day-to-day of their role, and are challenged with why, since they have experienced success in their career and in life. I'm here to help leaders think through their leadership journey, learn how to ask themselves better questions, and learn the formula to create their leadership journey by design. If you are ready to design your unique leadership journey, lead with confidence, and love the teams you lead, then you are in the right place. Let's do this. On this very first episode of A Leader's Journey podcast, I thought it would be helpful if I started out with sharing my leadership journey and how I got to where I am today. I do want to preface it with saying that this is my journey. This is the journey that was unique to me. And while I do think it is helpful for you to hear my journey, to understand the different things that I went through as a leader and what my journey looked like, I do want to preface it with saying that, again, this is my journey. Take from it what serves you, leave behind what doesn't, and know that your journey isn't going to look the same as mine. We each have our own unique journey, and I don't share it for comparison purposes. I share it just so you get to hear my experience in working through leadership, because I do think it is valuable for us to hear other leaders' journeys. What were some of the things that went well for them? What were some of the challenges that they faced? What were things that, looking back, would they maybe want to do over again, or have learned to handle those particular situations differently? Hearing others' lessons learned is how we get to learn and grow as leaders. Maybe not make the same mistakes that other leaders have, or maybe try some new things that, if we're stuck in a place where things aren't working for us, or they're going in a direction that we don't necessarily want them to go, or we just feel stuck and not sure where to start. Being able to hear other people's experiences gives you some ideas for you to, again, think through what serves you, what's going to fit your particular situation, what works well with who you uniquely are and how you are designed. So again, take from this what is going to serve you and what you might find helpful, and leave behind the rest that just isn't meant for you. My journey is again different from everybody else's. So I'm going to start a little bit before I even took a leadership role and how I got into leadership, and then what that looked like for me. So I started exploring a leader role back in 2004 when I was in an individual contributor role. And if I'm being honest and looking back for it, some of my intentions in wanting to join leadership, they were right for me at that point in time in where I was at my career, but not what I would recommend are the intentions that somebody has when they go into a leadership role. I was frustrated as an individual contributor, working through a lot of challenges within my team, seeing different people that were getting promoted to leadership roles or currently in them who, in my opinion at that time, they weren't leading well. Their teams didn't respect them. They struggled with them. And I felt like there was an opportunity for me to do better. And that's where I think that my intention of wanting to go into a leader role, part of it wasn't maybe in the best place, or not where I would recommend for somebody to start today. I will say, though, that I only have that thought because that is all hindsight. And looking back of how my journey started, I realized that there was a piece of me that didn't go into it with the best of intentions necessarily, or really the right intentions. There was also a part of me that really wanted to be a leader, because while I was only 5 years into my corporate career, I was already seeing the benefits of my experience and the work that I was able to contribute not only benefit me at work, but also benefit me at home. I was able to accomplish things in that first 5 years of my corporate career that if you would have asked me 6 years earlier would have been possibilities. I don't know that I would have seen it. I probably would have struggled to think that that's a possibility for me. And looking back at my family and the things that my parents did for a career looked very different. And so some of that was hard for me to be able to visualize, but I knew that I wanted to make a difference in people's lives. I wanted people to have the same opportunities that I was given and know that they had a leader that was going to invest in them and was going to do everything that they could within their part of helping somebody be successful. And so I started to look for what was potentially going to be the right role for me and what could I do to really help set myself up to be successful in a leader role. So that's when I started the habit of reading. I was always a reader, but never really picked up personal development or business type books. It was more of reading for fun and fantasy, or I really read a lot of educational materials like the encyclopedias or biographies of other people. That's where really my interest was. And as I knew when I was getting into a leadership role, like I had to learn how to lead. Up to that point, I was only responsible really for leading myself and maybe portions of my family. But I really wanted to make sure that I was investing in my growth. And I knew that before I even got into a leadership role. So I was looking for different books that I could explore and read and really dive into. So that way I knew what it is that I wanted to do. I will also say the landscape of leadership looked a lot different back then. There was a lot more functional aspects to a leader role. A lot of those that were leaders were getting promoted because they were the experts in place in the individual contributor role. And at the time, that's part of what made a really good leader. So when it came time for me to get promoted, I actually took my first leadership role in March of 2005, and I had interviewed for a role that was leading the team that I was currently a part of. So my first leadership position was leading a team whose function was the same role that I had previously held. And I do find that there were aspects of that that was very helpful, and from the point of view that I knew the job of the team that I was leading, and it was something that I was really good at. I felt really comfortable with. So taking that leader role, at the time I felt like was going to be where I would be most comfortable, was in a seat where I knew the job of the people that were doing it. Looking back, on the flip side of that, I do see where there were some challenges that I had because it did make that transition from individual contributor to leader a bit more challenging because it was challenging for me to not just jump in and do the work myself. And if I look back at that first leader position in 2005, there were a lot of times when I would jump in and do the work myself, especially if things would escalate. If a client wasn't happy, if an employee was struggling, we would sit down at my desk, and while we would do it together, I was the one behind the keyboard driving the work and actually getting it done. The leader I am today, almost 20 years later, I would definitely handle that differently. But back then that's what I knew. And so that was one of the challenges that I faced in that role, was finding the time and the balance between getting my responsibilities done as a leader, and because I was stepping into and recognizing now that I was doing the work that my team was supposed to be doing. That was their role, and my role was now different as the leader. But because I knew their role and I felt very comfortable doing their role, it was very easy for me to step in, take over, and just get it done, especially during our peak seasons. Because at that time, I was doing client onboarding. And at the end of the year, client onboarding was very busy for us. And so there were a lot of times I found myself handling the onboarding of a client. And then looking back now, I see where I was falling short on my leadership duties. Another challenge that I faced in that first role was I had moved out of state. So I had previously been living in the suburbs of Chicago where my family, my friends, my work friends that I had come to know and would spend a lot of time with, that's where they all lived. And my first leadership position took me to St. Louis. So it wasn't too far. It was a quick 4.5, 5 hour drive for me to get home to Chicago. But I was living in a city where I didn't have immediate family and only a couple friends that I knew lived in St. Louis. They still lived, though it was well over a 30 to 40-minute drive from where I lived. So it wasn't something that was always easy to get to or hang out with friends after work because the time just wasn't there by the time I would get home, get settled in, and then getting up early to head out to work. I did have some extended family that lived in St. Louis, but I did find that it was a great halfway point for me between family that I had in Chicago, my grandparents who lived in Arkansas. It put me a lot closer to them, so I did enjoy that. But it was hard. There were many days where I spent a lot of time alone, by myself in my apartment, in the evenings after work, especially if I had worked late. Um, so that was great from a reflection and contemplation standpoint. As you're going through maybe some difficult times, and going through some challenges, living in a city by yourself where you didn't have somebody that you were coming home to or somebody close by that you could talk to about that, did pose some challenges. I will also say that leading in 2005, it was different than leading today. So something to keep in mind is that this was before remote work was even a thing. If you wanted to work, you had to go to the office. There was no working from home, because we got a lot of snow or the weather was bad or just because it was part of your job or you were going to be working extra hours. Well, you could work from home that day, so you could work your overtime. You had to get in the car and drive to the office every time you wanted to work. We didn't have laptops, so you weren't able to take a computer home. So if you needed to do work on the computer, which even back then a lot of our job was on the computer, you had to go into the office because we had tower desktops. So that meant again, if we were working late, if you needed to work in the evening or you had to work on a weekend to get caught up, you were going into the office. Or sometimes I would find myself taking home mounds of paper and binders where I could do the work by hand. And then when I'd get back to the office, I'd be transferring what I needed to electronically, when I had my computer available. Although I did find some times when I was working weekends, I would just go into the office. It wasn't too far from where I lived, but it would just make it easier. And then I wasn't having to lug everything back and forth and carry a heavy bag. I did very much enjoy my first leadership role. I learned a lot. Looking back, some of the things that I kind of get a giggle about, like my one-on-ones were definitely an hour, but it was 2 or 3 pages of questions that I had. And I can see where, I was asking a lot of questions, which is great as a leader, but they were a bit more tactical than my one-on-ones are today. I learned a lot. I learned a lot in my first leadership role, which I held that position for just a little over 2 years, before moving into my next role. And it was a great experience. I got to connect with other leaders, get to see some things that I was able to apply in my leadership and see some things that I knew that was not the type of leader that I wanted to be. In 2007, that's when I moved into a different team. So it wasn't a promotion from a job grade or a pay increase perspective. It was just a change in responsibilities. So I had started out leading a new client onboarding team, and I moved to leading a small fulfillment team. So my team was now, instead of being client facing, they were now more behind the scenes, working internally with the employees of my company versus our clients. And in that fulfillment team, we were responsible for printing all the payrolls and printing and assembling clients' tax packages at the end of the year. It was a big change in responsibilities. I was used to always being in a client facing role, leading a client facing team, to now I really had to focus on being in a team that was going to be more functional as far as the aspects of the team that I was leading. And from a leader perspective, significantly more relational and internal facing. We were a production environment. A lot of what we got done and a lot of understanding that we would get from others was through the relationships that we built. And being in more of a production environment, it was more metrics driven. It was a lot of tracking data, analyzing data, looking at different costs of supplies and where can we save some money, where do we need to spend a little bit more money, diving a little bit more into different aspects of technology. So instead of being at a desk and behind a computer and on the phone all day, I spent a lot of time up on my feet, moving around, monitoring some of the things that my team was doing, checking in to see how things are going. Are all of our printers functional? Are check stuffing machines functional? And really looking at things from a metrics standpoint, because being in that production environment, everything we did was really metrics driven. How many checks per hour did we cut or pack? Did we hit our deadlines? A lot of the work that we were doing, we no longer could set the deadlines for. They were usually set by something external, whether it was our shipping carriers. They picked up at a certain time, so we knew if our packages needed to go out for delivery the next day, we had to make that pickup. There was no negotiating with it. I'm not going to be able to sit there and tell the driver of a major shipping organization, I'm sorry, but can you guys hold your plane for our couple packages? Like that wasn't something that was going to happen. So the deadlines that we had, they were much more strict, much more out of our control. And so that helped me in really learning a lot more about time management and how it was that I was going to be structuring my time as a leader, and how I would coach others to structure their time. Because again, we had set deadlines and there was no negotiating with them. And if we didn't do our part, get our packages packed and with the carrier that night for delivery the next day, that possibly meant that somebody wasn't going to get paid on time. And in the payroll industry, and really for any employee in any industry, one of the worst possible things that can happen to you as an employee is not getting paid on time. And I had a really fantastic team that I very much enjoyed working with, who we all felt very passionate about. We are going to focus on doing everything that we can that was within our control to make sure that our clients' employees got paid on time. Now, we couldn't control weather. It was St. Louis in the winter. They got snow, um, mostly a lot of ice, and if it's snowing and icing, sometimes you can't get out on the roads. So we couldn't control things like weather delays. We couldn't control equipment malfunctions of the carriers. And so we really focused on what is it that we needed to do to make sure that we hit our measurements. Through that, I also learned a lot about analyzing data and how I could leverage that data in leading my team and how to coach somebody around it. If you do work in a production environment, usually your team understands that data is going to drive a lot of what it is that you do. It could also, though, come across as very non-people centric if you're strictly focused on the numbers, right? You could very easily be making your team feel like they are just a number on a spreadsheet and that's all that you care about. And so that role gave me an opportunity of how do you leverage data in that conversation to where you can still hit the measurements and the KPIs or key performance indicators that you were measured on. Because as the leader, that's what I was going to be measured on. My performance review was driven by the measurements and the production of our team. So if we didn't hit our marks, if we had too many errors or not enough production in a particular day, and that added up over the course of a year, my performance review was going to be lower because my team was that's how our team was measured. We were measured on making sure that we were productive. Um, and so I did learn how do you coach people around that, and that's a hard skill to learn. And I will say that by the time that I ended up leaving St. Louis, which I'll take you into the next part of my leadership journey, it was still a skill I was learning. It was a hard one to really be focused on. And again, how do you help people understand and see the importance of the metric, but know that you are going to coach and develop them as a person to help them build the skills that they need to be able to meet that metric. I really spent a short time there in that role in St. Louis, and in it was just a little over a year. And in September of 2008, I moved from St. Louis to Georgia, again, with no family in the state of Georgia, or even close by. At that point in time, my closest relatives were at minimum a 12-hour car ride away. And my closest friends, they were still about 2 hours away. And so I did find myself in a city again by myself, which there were aspects of that I very much enjoyed, but there were aspects of it looking back, I can see where it was very lonely. And um, as the leader of the team that I had, I did find that it made it very easy for me to not have good work life harmony. And I'm not going to say balance. I don't believe in balance. That's a whole other conversation for a different episode. But because I didn't have anybody at home or friends close by to hang out with, I had to make all new friends. But it did also lead to me working a lot of extra hours because I didn't really have much else to do. And when I moved into that team, I was still leading a fulfillment team. So, very much still a production based environment, yet I did have a significantly larger team. So, in St. Louis, I had a pretty small team, less than 8 people. And we only supported one office, which was the St. Louis office. So it was really easy that if we had a question, we could just walk out of our area of the office over to somebody's desk and ask them that question. They worked the same time zone that we did. We were all in the office, well, they were in the office 8 to 5. We worked a little bit later, just to wrap up, but we knew come 5 o'clock our time, we were going to be wrapped up and done for the day. And so there were a lot of conveniences of supporting only one office and the office that you were physically in, from that aspect. Plus, we knew everybody. It was a really smaller office in general, but you did know everybody. Like I said, it was easy just to walk down the hall and ask somebody a question and be able to show them exactly what you're looking at. In Atlanta, I was actually leading a team of 16 employees who supported multiple office locations. And through that leadership journey, that turned into multiple offices in multiple time zones. We weren't just working off of the Eastern time zone. It was also a shift in the fact that my team was primarily made up of entry level employees who were taking on kind of their first quote unquote real job, if you will. And if they got promoted, it was the first time that they would be promoted in their work. A lot of the positions, they were part-time hourly positions that were afternoon to evening hours. And so that led to it really catering to more of a college-aged student who was going to be in class during the day but needed a job in the afternoons and evenings to help cover the cost of tuition and books. And we were very lucky in that office that we had a local college who we had a really great relationship with that was less than 5 minutes from our office. So it did give us a really great recruiting pool to pull from. In that team, I would say that that's the role that really helped me get clear on who I wanted to be as a leader, what my strengths were as a leader, what my weaknesses were as a leader. And I got really great experience of being able to see the big picture of running a business. I was fortunate enough as I started in that role to work for a manager who wanted me to handle my department, who really gave me the autonomy to make decisions, yet was there to help hold me accountable and guide me through those decisions since I was still newer in my leadership career. I was only a little over 3 years in at that point. Um, but in my prior roles, I didn't really have a lot of decision-making authority as the branch manager at that time. They took a lot of the decisions. I was able to make some decisions specifically for my department, but not on a bigger scale, especially when it came to things like headcount and budgets. And in 2008, when I took on that role, I wouldn't say that I had that decision making authority right away. And I don't know that I ever really was able to make that decision, but I was able to put together the business cases and learn how to advocate for my team to be able to show the data of here's what it is that we needed from a headcount and budget perspective. And some years I was able to change what corporate would give us, and other years we were stuck with what we got and had to make the best of it, right? Um, and leading that team, when I first got there, we solely supported the Atlanta and our Birmingham offices. And the goal of my manager at that time was to grow the team. The company was moving towards more centralized printing and trying to um, manage costs from not having expensive printers and check insertion machines in all the offices, to really leveraging more of the high production printers in fewer offices, from a cost standpoint, from a productivity standpoint, from a maintenance standpoint. In some of the smaller offices, when equipment like that, it would sit idle for a while. And as that equipment sits idle, it just tends to not work as well. It needs to be used. It's built to be used. It wants to be used. And so I got the experience of being able to go into other offices and partner with their teams. And it's hard when you're coming into an office and you work for the same company as the people that you're in, right? You guys have the same goals, have the same objectives from an organization perspective, yet they know that you're coming in there to understand their clients, to evaluate what they have in their print center, to see what needs to be shipped to yours and what we just need to get rid of or not take with us. And so it was a very humbling experience on one aspect, because I was lucky enough to partner with some really great people who really took it in stride and truly wanted to help set me and my team up for success, knowing that by doing so, they were going to be out of a job. They were going to be out of a job. Um, it was hard because I didn't want that for anybody. As a leader, one of the things that I had learned about myself at that point in time was I wanted everybody to have the same success that I had. I was, you know, soon to be celebrating my 10th anniversary with the company, something I had dreamed about, of I was going to find my one company that I was going to stay with forever and follow in my grandfather's footsteps, for lack of a better word, and be with the same company for over 40 years. I was committed to retiring from there, and I wanted that for everybody else so badly. I wanted everybody to be able to build a career, to have similar success that I had, to see the value that you can come into an organization with little to no experience, and they were going to invest in you and help you learn as you grew as a person and as a professional. So it was humbling from that perspective, because I knew that in working with some of them, they weren't going to be able to stay with the organization. They're just either wasn't roles in their office that played to their strengths, or roles that were even available in their office. And again, still at that time, 2008, 2009, 2010, working from home and remote, it still wasn't a thing. Geez, I think the first year we got laptops was like 2011, 2012, which it wasn't that long ago, yet it still seems so far ago that it's hard to remember exactly when we didn't have laptops, but I know in 2008 and 9 we didn't. So there wasn't the option to sit in one city and work for another. Our company wasn't there quite yet. They were still having conversations of how does that work within our business and what could this potentially look like, um, for different roles, but I still had a job to do, and I needed to do it with grace. I needed to do it with professionalism. And there were just times when it was really hard, but I don't regret any of it because I did learn how do you let people leave an organization with grace, and leading a team that was again primarily entry level employees. That meant that I needed to get really comfortable with the exit of an employee, whether it was they were resigning because they found a better opportunity or an opportunity that more supported what they were looking for in their career, or if it was a situation where I needed to make that decision and I needed to terminate them for their level of work performance that wasn't meeting the standards. And really being able to let somebody do that with grace, with humility, with treating them with respect. That was a skill set that I unfortunately learned through some tough situations, or fortunately, I wouldn't say unfortunately. Fortunately, I did learn them through some tough situations because I do think that gave me some great experience. But that was an aspect of that job, and you know, in that role throughout the time that I was there, I did have to make the decision to terminate several employees. Our team when I first got there was not performing at the level that we needed to be, and changes needed to be made. And there were some people that were hired into the team who they weren't culture fits for the organization. They weren't good fits for our role. Um, Through my experience in that, I also was able to learn how do you motivate people who may not be as invested in your company as you are. And I say that from the aspect of, I spent almost 10 years in that particular role. I was committed. Again, I was ready to retire from that company. I wasn't leaving. I had made that decision that I wasn't going to go anywhere, that I had everything that I needed within that organization to challenge me to grow. And I was committed. That particular organization's one of their primary colors was blue, and I bled blue. And every aspect, I had the trophies of in my desk or the awards that I had won. I had all the swag. Like everybody knew I was fully committed to the success of that company. And in an entry level team, that's not always the case, and sometimes that's really hard when you have people that are in that role that are performing well. They do very well. Their commitment just isn't there for them. This is a part-time job to help them get through school. They're studying in an area that your company just doesn't have roles. It's not our industry. And so you know that they're probably going to be in that role maybe 2 years. If you were lucky and maybe you caught them as a freshman in school and you might get them 4 years, but you knew come the time that they were going to graduate, they were going to do something else. And if that's where their area of focus was for their career, then I wanted that for them, but I also wanted them to make sure that they showed up committed and really saw the value of the work that they were doing, even though this wasn't going to be their long-term career. Um, this is where I really started diving into my growth as a leader, and personal development really became a critical aspect of what I wanted to do because I faced a lot of challenges in that particular role. Our team was growing, our company was growing. With growth comes pain, and challenge. there's a lot of great things that come with growth as well. Like we felt like we had job security. It was nice to see the company winning. Our stock price was going up. Our bonuses were great every year. But there was some level of pain that we felt, in our day-to-day responsibilities, and helping to keep a team motivated, especially when things did get tough, whether it was a really busy week, um, whether it was we were working through maybe some illness that spread through the team, being in a production environment, people didn't have a dedicated workstation. A lot of the equipment and things that we used, it was all shared. We were on our feet moving packages through the production line, and so you were using the same keyboard that somebody else was just using, and everybody touched it throughout the course of the day. So if one person got sick and had germs, then that was going to spread, right? And if we were short staffed, sometimes that meant that um, we would be working longer hours. We would get stuck later. We would potentially, again, miss some of our deadlines. Again, deadlines set by national carriers that I can't stop their plane. And so we had to make sure that we were able to hit all of those deadlines. Um, you know, Throughout the course of my time there, again, we took in multiple other offices. So we were not only supporting offices in the Eastern time zone, we were also supporting offices in the Central time zone, which meant that our work was going to run on average an hour to 90 minutes later than our partners who were only servicing um, office locations that were in their time zone. And so our office was set up unique. We were one of the only, well, really at that time, probably the only office that supported multiple time zones. And so really trying to get clear and really focus on how do we best utilize our time? How do we be the most productive and not let that be an obstacle to our success? Coaching a team that big, that was the biggest team that I had ever coached before, which meant that come performance review time, I had 16 reviews to write those particular years. So it did put a little bit more of administrative work on my plate as a leader. Um, and again, it was finding kind of that harmony between where and when do I get my administrative work done and when do I need to be on the floor with my team. I will say one of the things that I really did enjoy was the camaraderie between the group. We were in the office 5 days a week with each other. We got to know each other very well, personally and professionally. That meant that we got to be there to help support each other through some challenging situations and celebrate the positive things that were happening in each other's lives. And when you're spending 40 hours a week with somebody, you really do get to see different sides of people, and it helped me really learn a lot of different personalities. So being in the office every day, again, there were some challenges with it. There were a lot of late nights. There were a lot of times that we worked weekends, Saturdays and Sundays, especially at the end of the year when it came time for tax returns and W-2s. We would take Christmas Day off, but New Year's wasn't really a thing for us because we were working New Year's night. We were back in the office New Year's Day and constantly working to make sure that we were able to hit the deadlines that we have. Um, Again, I really think this is where I grew the most as a leader in running my business, but really coaching and developing my team. Um, One of the realizations in leading that team that I learned about myself, which I think was always there as a leader, but I didn't know it. It really came to light for me in that particular role. And again, looking back, I see where that influenced other decisions, other future decisions that I made. But I knew that I loved leading a team of entry level employees. I loved being able to give people their first job, to get them their first promotion, to help set that pace for their career, helping them see their highest potential and possibilities that they never thought of for themselves, and being able to coach them through that. For some of them, that meant that I was coaching them out of the job that they had and preparing them for their career, which wasn't going to be our organization, um, which in some companies would may not be supported, right? Everybody wants you to stay within your organization. I knew though, and my leader at that time knew though, that we were going to hire people who didn't want and were not going to pursue a long-term career with our organization. Um, Again, at the start of that, remote wasn't a thing. And so you couldn't, some of the jobs that people wanted, they were only based out of our corporate headquarters. And you know, there were a lot of members of our team living in the South who were not willing to move to the Northeast. That wasn't an option for them, whether it was financial driven, family driven, or they had never seen snow in their life, so they most certainly were not going to move to a city where snow was measured in feet during the peak of the winter season. They couldn't fathom that. And so, I really was able to network with a lot of recruiters, network with the local college, and really help start building some frameworks for how do you develop people? How do you build and develop a team, knowing that I was going to be in a constant state of turnover? In the years that I was leading that team, I averaged hiring a minimum of 5 people every year. And for some leaders, that is not something that they want to do. And I will tell you that it is hard because you are constantly training new people. It is very rewarding because I loved being able to get people the experience within our company for them as they continued to pursue their career, to know that they had the work experience and were able to put on their resume that they got to work for a very highly respected organization in our industry. That I know that that was able to do a lot for people, and may have and did get some of them jobs that maybe they wouldn't have been able to get or been seen as a top candidate, but because they worked for us, that gave them a bit of an advantage through their interview process. um It also helped me, though, learn that if I was going to be in that constant state of turnover, again, averaging a minimum of 5, you know, that was the minimum I think that we ever hired in one year. I think one year we only hired 3. That was the lowest, but on average, it was 5 employees a year. Many of those to internal promotions, they moved up within our organization, which was fantastic. Um, but I was able to quickly recognize that we needed to be on par and have a very solid onboarding process, not just for me as a leader and how I was going to onboard somebody, but how our team was going to onboard somebody within the team. We needed to have very clear and structured training programs in place that allowed us to really reduce the speed to proficiency. How do you bring somebody into your team and teach them the different aspects of the role, to where you were not spending months and months and months training somebody in their job? How could we get them up to speed as quickly as possible without compromising their learning experience? Because if we shortcut anything, there were things that they weren't going to know, or there was the risk that equipment would get broken, which if some of our equipment got broken, it shut us down for the day, and we couldn't do that. That wasn't an option for us. um and then building succession planning. If I was going to be the department that was going to be bringing people into our organization, and my goal was for all of those that wanted it to be promoted into other parts of the company. I wanted to be the department that my peer leaders in other departments could look to say, we're going to have an opening. Who does Shannon have that is ready to promote into that role. I knew that I was going to have to build out some pretty solid succession plans that would give people experience in their role, see how that experience translates into other roles within the company, get them exposure to the different roles, and most importantly, get them exposure to the people that worked in those different departments. My team being in the production department, we were the bottom floor of the building. We were literally in the basement of the building. And because we worked primarily afternoon and evening hours, we weren't always in the same building as the rest of the departments in our office who worked the traditional 8 to 5 schedule and who were 2 to 3 floors up from us in the building. Their paths, if you weren't intentional, your paths weren't going to cross in the course of a normal work day. So I did spend a lot of time working with my team, and what does the ideal onboarding and training plan look like? What does that look like for me as a leader? And making sure that I was promoting our organization properly through my interviewing process and making that a seamless transition when they started. Um, really investing again in that training, making sure that not only did my new employee have a fantastic and supportive training experience, building out a mentor program and a trainer program for my team where they felt comfortable and they were working on building the skills to train a new employee and how could they do that, was a big area of focus for us as well. And it took a couple years to really develop it, get it in writing, work through it a few times, make some modifications, work through it again, gather more feedback, make some more modifications, and over the course of the time that the team as a whole really focused on it, we made that one of our top priorities. We had these beautiful training booklets that the trainer and the trainee would each get. They knew exactly what to expect. It was outlined week to week of these are the different tasks that you're going to cover. Here's where you're supposed to be at from a production standpoint. Here's how we're going to measure this. Here's your check-ins with your leader. Here's your check-ins with your trainer. And we were able to really provide a great experience for them, but get them up to speed and get them to a point where even if they weren't the most effective or the most productive on the team, they felt like they were contributing, that they were learning, and that they were growing right from the start of their career journey. And that's something that I see in my leadership today. When we don't have our I's dotted and our T's crossed in training, our new hire can very easily feel that they aren't contributing to the team. And depending on the time of year that they start, if that is at the peak of your workload, that pressure to perform, that pressure to contribute is even greater. Um, as I worked through that career, I also faced some personal challenges. So I said on this podcast, I'm going to share the good, the bad, and the ugly. There was a year or so where I was really struggling as a leader. There was a lot of change within our organization. The company was going in a different direction. The leader that had mentored me and that I'd worked for and that I had a tremendous amount of respect for, was no longer with the organization. And I was working for a leader who I did not have that same level of respect for. And based on how that leader chose to show up and how that leader chose to lead, it wasn't an environment where I was going to thrive in the things that I wanted to do and how I needed to be led. Um, and there were a tough year or two, tough couple years, especially as I got towards the end of that position, that I started questioning my abilities as a leader and didn't always show up the best for my team. I could look back now and I do think that I knew that in the moment, but when I look back on it and I reflect on it, I did a disservice to them for a while because I wasn't able to show up as my best self. And I take full accountability for that. I get to choose how it is that I show up every day. I get to choose how it is that I show up as a person and how I let others impact me. But where I was in my growth journey and my leadership journey, I had a lot of, I guess, victim energy and pointed that finger at my leader. And I'm not going to say that that person didn't contribute to some of that because their leadership style was not one that I thrived in. It was very much a dictatorship, I guess, for lack of a better word, and one where it was demoralizing. You were talked down to, your ideas weren't welcome nor respected. They were very set in their ways. That leader was very clear in what it is that they wanted. They were going to get it, and it didn't matter the cost. I remember an incident through that time where my job was threatened. My leader came across the desk at me, and I knew that at that point in time, no physical harm was done, but to have a leader get within inches of your face and tell you that if you didn't do what they wanted, you weren't going to work there anymore. Um, I knew that was an environment that I was going to be able to continue to be in. And I also recognized very quickly, um, you know, the early part of my leadership, I was a very immature leader. I have no issues with acknowledging that or admitting it. I didn't in the early part of my leadership, I did not buy into um, the mindset that is out there that people don't leave companies, they leave leaders. Uh, I I had a very different viewpoint on that. I used to say, "Oh no, they don't leave their leader. That's their choice. If they choose to want to leave, they're leading the organization. It's decisions that the organization made that prompted them to leave." And looking back and having gone through that experience myself, I now see, and I do believe that while a company is responsible for their leaders, and there is a lot that an organization can do to make sure that their leaders truly are showing up at their best for their teams. I can't say that I left because of the organization. There were some things that maybe weren't going in the right direction. But I left primarily because of the challenges that I had with the leader that I worked for and where I was in my leadership journey, and really questioning, was I as good of a leader as I thought I was? Could I do this someplace else? That organization was the only organization I had known my entire career. I'd had jobs in high school, um, that I worked, but this was my first adult job, if you will, or my first real job. And I felt like I needed a new challenge as a leader, with the struggles that I had gone through, the things that I had overcome, and working through those challenges and being in a place where I was starting to second guess if I was as good as I thought. I felt like a change was necessary. Things had also changed in my personal life. I had gotten married, and continuing to work the hours that I was working, which my schedule was 9 to 6, Monday through Friday. Um, but if my team wasn't done, I didn't get to go home. So, and we were almost never done at 6 o'clock Eastern time because we were again supporting branches in the Central Time Zone. It was only 5 o'clock. They were barely logging off for the day. They still had things that we needed to do. And while most days I was able to leave my team to close. I had developed some leads within my team who were able to handle things. They knew my cell phone number if they needed me. They knew I was a phone call away. Um, I lived 20 to 30 minutes if there was no traffic at 7, 8 o'clock at night, that if I needed to drive back to the office, I could. Um, but it did lead to a lot of late nights, a lot of weekend work. And when you're trying to build the marriage, working the hours that I was working, that wasn't where I wanted to be anymore. And so a change was necessary for me, not just for me personally, but for me professionally. I really needed to rebuild my confidence as a leader and trust in my leadership ability and prove to myself that I could lead elsewhere, that I could take the skills that I had built into another organization and find success. And so in February of 2017, I decided to leave the organization that I had worked for 18 years. It was the only company I'd worked for my entire adult life. I was 19 when I had started there. Um, I had grew up as a person, as an adult, as a professional in that organization. I had made friends. I had a network. Again, I never saw myself leaving, and to make that decision was not easy. It took a lot of contemplation and a lot of conversations with my husband, with my grandfather, with other leaders who I had developed relationships with that I very much respected their perspectives on things. Um, and seeing what I needed to see what was out there. And again, there were some things that were changing in the organization. A lot of my peers had left to go to another company in the area. So some of them were reaching out saying, "Hey, you're kind of the last holdout. We've all left. When are you coming to join us?" And again, at that point, I was looking for a new challenge. With doubting my leadership abilities, and wondering if the success that I had had was only because I was in the organization I was familiar with, and if I had built strong enough leadership skills that would transfer over. It was a scary decision. Um, I was extremely nervous. I was comfortable where I was. And making a change meant I would be going from the tenured subject matter and organization expert within the organization. I developed a lot of respect amongst my peers, and had a lot of respect for them. The relationship was completely mutual, and we would lean on each other for a lot of knowledge sharing. Could I go from being, kind of the top of the leadership totem pole, if you will, I guess, kind of I was at the top of my game, even though I had had some struggles, I was still the top of my game to being the new kid on the block. Um, there were also some changes that we were going through in our personal lives. We were looking to move and buy a new home, and changing jobs at that time obviously impacts a lot of other things. It impacts your ability to get approval for a mortgage. Do you really want to be working someplace new where you don't know what the future holds for you there while you just bought this new home? So there were a lot of things to really think about. It was a very critical time in my life. It came with a lot of challenge, a lot of anxiety, a lot of doubt, also a lot of excitement and a lot of growth. And so I did leave the company that I had previously been working for to go work for another organization in the same industry. And it was exciting and scary. I was moving from leading a behind the scenes client facing team to now stepping back into a client facing role, and different from what I had done before, because what I had done before in client facing was, new client onboarding. This was now ongoing client service and maintaining the relationships and the payroll for our ongoing clients. And I had been out of the client facing aspect of payroll processing for about a decade. Again, having worked in that production environment, to now I'm going back to a more relational environment within my team. Took a lot of challenge, and I faced a lot of challenge there because there were a lot of people that worked where I had worked before. There were some perceptions that I had to work through right from the start, right from day one, that people had of me and the decisions that I had to make before that they didn't have the behind the scenes information to understand. Um, but that led them to believe that, when Shannon comes into an organization, she's coming in to clean house because that's what I had to do in my prior role when I was first hired in there. I was hired to clean house, to change the performance of the department. And now I was going into this team, and there were a lot of people that were worried that that was the leader that I was, that their jobs were in jeopardy because they were going to be working for me, and would I change the tone of the team? So throughout the course of that, obviously you've got to prove it. I can say all day, here's what happened. And, I was able to explain some things to my leader at the time about where I felt that their perceptions may have come from, and paint a picture of what the reality of that situation was, and what I was tasked with, that really only a leader is probably going to understand. And to be honest, they weren't things for everybody to know. They were business objectives that were given of me, and I was the one that needed to follow through on them. They weren't things that I needed to be sharing with everybody. But I had to do a lot of work and a lot of growth in myself as a leader, in really understanding who I was going to be at this point, and how do I build the relationships with people to prove that I wasn't here for the end of their career. I was here to help propel their career and move it forward, and letting them see different sides of me, and knowing and showing up and investing in their growth, and helping them get promoted. Um, that was something I was able to work through. Again, came with some challenges. It's not always easy, especially when you're not knowledgeable. Not only am I trying to learn the organization, I'm trying to learn the role of my team. It was completely different. While we may have been in the same industry, the day-to-day processes and how things were done was so different. Um, I was learning all of the people in that organization. I was learning my team, and I was having to relearn who I was as a leader and how I wanted to show up. And that's when I really started to dive deep into my personal development and my growth as a leader. I started picking up reading more leadership development books. I will say John Maxwell was one of the authors that I read a significant number of his books, and really started diving into his leadership concepts, because the things that I was learning from him, they very much resembled how I wanted to be as a leader, and the person that I wanted to be able to show up as, not only for myself, but for my team. Um, I stayed within the ongoing service team for my payroll team for just about 3 years, and was able to develop some great relationships, was able to, change the perception that people had of me as a leader. It felt great when several members of my team were getting promoted into other roles. And it felt great when people wanted to be a part of my team. They wanted to be a part of that. I very much enjoyed seeing the growth and the development in my team, and having them come and say, you challenged me and you pushed me. And I'm going to be honest, I really wasn't happy about it at first, but I'm so glad that you did, because I've learned so much about myself, and taking the concepts and the lessons that I was bringing forth for them, and being able to share that with others in their lives, whether it was friends or their family or their children. It was a really great role. I very much enjoyed it. And again, I felt like I was ready for a change, and ready to put the leadership skills that I was continuing to develop, put them to the test again, put them to a different challenge, and really elevate the skills that I had. And in March of 20, or not March, I guess it was, I was interviewing for a position right as the world started to change and was going through a very difficult time. In March of 2020, we all know what happened then, in working through the pandemic. And in May of 2020 was when I officially moved into my role that I am in today and leading the benefits team. Um, it was very hard. And I will say that that was single-handedly the hardest transition that I made as a leader. Um, I wanted to do it. It was the right decision for me individually. I was excited about the opportunity. I was looking forward to working for the director that I was working for. She's somebody that I have a tremendous amount of respect for and knew that I would continue to grow as a leader. Um, it was a team that I wanted to learn more about and really dive into. Um, and my husband and I had some several conversations and some pretty deep conversations about, is this really the right time? And that's when I started to recognize that there's never going to be a good time to make a change as a leader. And it's not about the timing. It's how you handle that particular situation. And do I think that I handled it the best? No, of course not. And looking back, I feel like there were a lot of things that I could have done differently. But for who I was in that moment and the information I had at that time, I felt like I made the best decision that I could. But it was hard to leave my team. We had developed some very close relationships. And at a time when they were struggling the most in their role, payroll was hard in May of 2020. You had a lot of companies that were doing a lot of layoffs. Our teams were the busiest that we had ever been. It was the peak of year-end volumes every single day. And it wasn't so much that um, the volume was high. I don't want to say that it wasn't, because I don't want to undersell that. The volume of calls that our teams were getting, the volume of issues that they were having to work, it was very high. Um, the emotional aspect of every interaction was so much more significant than it had ever been, because we're doing payrolls for people that are getting their hours cut. There were wages that were cut. People's pay was getting cut because businesses didn't know if they had the funds to continue to support this when maybe in their particular area everything was shut down, or some things were shut down, or maybe their business wasn't deemed essential. While we had been working from home, I was in the office usually 4 days a week. So that was the first time I had worked from home more than one, maybe 2 days at the most, but that was very, very sporadic. I was usually in the office 4 to 5 days a week. So that was the first time I was working from home. But a lot of our clients hadn't fully developed a work from home philosophy. They they didn't have their employees working from home, and a lot of organizations maybe had their employees working from home 1 day a week, and now they're going to 4 to 5 days a week because they're not able to get to their office location, or they didn't feel that it was safe for them or worth the risk of coming into the office. And they knew that maybe there were other positions in their company, like ours, for example. We had positions in our company that can only be done in the office. They're not, it's not work that can be done at home. And so those that could work from home did work from home because we needed to reduce the exposure and the risk to those that were coming into the office. And there was just a lot of unknowns happening in the world. In hindsight, you can look back at it and make all the assumptions that you did. But again, we made the best decisions that we could with the information that we had at that particular time. But having to sit down and do it through Zoom and tell my team that when they were at the peak of their work and they were in a place of significant uncertainty personally, professionally, to tell them that I was leaving them, that was really hard. It was really hard. It was a message I didn't want to deliver, but I knew that I had to. And it had nothing to do with moving to the team that I was. It was how do you tell the team that you've worked with for a couple years and develop strong relationships with, that you're not going to be there for them. Um, it was an emotional team meeting. I'm not typically an emotional person. A lot of the people on my team, I don't feel like they were outwardly emotional people in the workplace. Um, and that was a really tough meeting. Um, and the individual conversations that followed afterwards, I learned a lot about myself as a leader and how I wanted to handle adversity, how I wanted to handle that. And looking back, really focusing on how did I make that the easiest transition for them as possible. Because at that point in time, while I was excited to move to a new opportunity and learn, I really needed to focus on my team. I really needed to focus on my team and make that as easy as possible. Um, Moving into my role, I had a steep learning curve. Again, I was being onboarded in a remote environment, so I didn't even get to see, let's see, I didn't get to see my boss or any of my direct reports for 5 months. Everything was done through Zoom. Like I had only seen them in the little Zoom box. So getting to meet them face to face, although it was in small pockets and it wasn't my entire team, because in this role I lead a team that sits coast to coast. So I had employees in 5 different offices, four of which I didn't sit in. They weren't in my time zone, they weren't in my state. So those employees I wasn't going to get to see face to face for quite some time. And so, as a leader, you're really I put myself to the test of how do you develop relationships? How do you establish yourself as a leader and connect with people at a time when there is a lot happening in the world and a lot happening at home for my employees, and making a leadership change really is a challenge for your employees. Regardless of the circumstances, it's a challenge, but when you add all that stuff onto it, it's a whole other level of challenge. And I continued to dive into my growth and development, and I started connecting with some different leaders outside of the organization, and really started to recognize that for myself, for me to be at my best, I was going to develop the skill of coaching. I wanted to coach and develop the best people in the organization. I wanted my team and the people that I was fortunate enough to work with to feel that their leader was 100% invested in them, and that without a doubt they were going to achieve the things that they wanted to achieve in their career. And so I started diving a lot more into coaching and understand, what does coaching really mean. And that's another topic for another episode as well, because I do think that there's a lot of negative connotation around coaching. Um, Coaching is not discipline. So I'm just going to put that out there. It's not discipline. It's coaching is development. And how was I going to do that as a leader? And so, I started I pursued my dream and took a coaching certification course, and am now a certified professional coach and able to take all the things that I've learned into the development of my team. And my team has a wide variety of tenure. I have some people, who have only been with the organization right now a handful of months, 4 to 5, all the way up to 34 years. And each of them has different needs, and they challenge me in different ways every single day. And I enjoy that. I do enjoy being able to, you know, help people see their potential, help them challenge themselves in growing within their role. Um, and being able to take the tools and the work that I've done for myself and bring that into my day-to-day work, and being able to guide people of, if they're looking for a book recommendation, I got you a book recommendation. I love to read, and I love to tell others, here's a great book to read. But even more so than that, how do you take what you're reading and apply it into their role? How do I help develop better leaders in the organization? Because every organization needs leaders. We need leaders. And how am I going to develop them? And that's really where a lot of my focus has been, is how is it that I am going to coach and develop my team to achieve their goals, whether their goals are, I'm just starting out, this is my first adult job, and I don't know where I'm going to see myself in 5 years. I just want to figure out how I'm going to do the job that I have right now, but I know I want a career, but they don't know how to articulate what that is for them to help them start thinking about who's the person that they want to be in 5 years and not getting stuck tied to the job title, and being able to coach them through learning their role and the different challenges that come with learning their role, and um how do they build relationships across the organization, in their role, all the way to the person that is going to be ready to retire in a couple years, and how do you help coach them through that transition to where they're still contributing because they want to and they want to be successful, but also then preparing for how do you share and continue to share the knowledge and expertise that you have, and helping them prepare and see the different options that are available to them. And some of those options we don't even know, because the world of work has changed and is going to continue to change. So the options that are available today, when that person is ready to retire, say in 2 to 3, 4, 5 years, there's going to be different options available. I don't know what they are. I can't say that with 100% certainty, because nobody in the company has said that. I don't even know that we're there necessarily to make that decision. However, in looking at what's evolved over the last few years, that anything is possible. And so, how do you help coach that person? And so, that's really where a lot of my focus and my growth has been. I love the team that I lead right now. I can say that I'm able to show up almost every day in most situations with a lot of confidence as a leader. That's not to say that I don't have days where I struggle, because I do. There are days and situations where I'm not as confident. There are days and situations where, let's just be honest, I'm human like everybody else. I wake up on the wrong side of the bed, and going to work is the last thing I want to do. I just want to pull the covers back over my head and stay there all day. But I got to learn to dust myself off, get up, and show up, because I know that I have a team that is dependent on me. And that's not true. They're not dependent on me. Let me rephrase that for a little bit. They are looking to me to help lead the way. They are looking for me to help guide them in their career. I have an incredible team. If I didn't show up to work, they're still going to get their work done, and it's going to get done with excellence. They'll be able to make the decisions that they need to make. I just need to be there to help be their cheerleader, to help challenge them, to help them grow, to help them when they have those moments where they can't think because they've done 45 different things today. How do I help come in to be the voice of reason, to be the sounding board for them, that they can talk through what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what they need to do. Um, and sometimes it is making the decision for them, and sometimes it's helping them to make the decision for themselves. But being able to show up as my best every day, and balancing that with the vulnerability. There are days when I have to tell my team, listen, I'm not on my A game today. I'm really struggling. We're going to work through this together, and I'm going to show up for you, and I'm going to help. But know that my thought processes probably aren't as sharp as they need to be today. And that's where having that confidence as a leader has allowed me to have that level of vulnerability with my team, where when I'm there to pick them up, when they're having days where they're challenged by different things, they in turn do the same thing for me. That when I'm having those days where I'm like, oh, okay, I might need you to tell me this twice because I probably didn't fully understand it the first time. They're patient enough to work through that with me. And now I'm still moving forward with my career. I love the work that I do, and now it's how do I help other leaders navigate through their leadership journey. A few years ago, I was really passionate about, and I still am. I'm still very passionate about the individual contributor, and how do we help grow and develop them to help them see their potential, to open up doors or have them look at doors that they never thought that they could walk through because they didn't have maybe the functional expertise, or they didn't check every box of the requirements on a job description, building their confidence for them to be able to go in and say, I know I don't check all these boxes, but here's the skills and the value that I bring to your team. And here's the experience that I have that relates to that. I recognize quickly I'm one person, and I can only help so many individual contributors throughout the course of my career. And I really do want to turn that focus. And that's where I've been focused the last couple years is how can I help other leaders navigate through their leadership journey, help them build the skills that they need to be confident in the team that they are leading, to love the team that they are leading, and help them in building those skills for their individual contributors, whether that is an entry-level individual contributor, whether it is a skilled professional that they are leading, helping leaders recognize and how they can lead into the gifts that make them unique and special, and the strengths that they bring into their leadership, and not having to compromise who they are to lead a team successfully, and know that they can do that regardless of their role. And it's also helping leaders find the roles that are right for them. One of the things that I have been intentional about and through my leadership journey, and if you look back over the course of my leadership, I have stayed in roles where I am leading entry level individual contributors, and that's because I love it. I love it. I've said it earlier. I love being able to give people their first job or their first promotion. It brings a very strong sense of joy for me. I love being able to help bring people into my organization and setting them on their career path. I've been fortunate enough this fall to be able to do that in a little bit of a different way, and really being able to coach and develop some of our seasonal employees, and now trying to find them permanent places within our organization. But again, I recognize that I'm one person, and while I'm going to do that, throughout the course of my workday, I do want to help leaders, be able to do the same for whatever it is that the team that they love to lead. Help them really get clear on what that is for them. I see a lot of leaders bounce around to different roles within the organization, and I want to be able to help them choose the roles that are right for them, that play to their strengths. And again, help them lead with confidence, help them love the teams that they're leading, find the right teams that are for them, where they get to make the difference and the impact that all leaders desire to make. So that's a little bit about my leadership journey and what has brought me to where I am today, and why we're here having this conversation. This is a way for me to share the things that I've learned to help grow leaders, and to continue to contribute to the individual contributors that really do help make our organizations work, and how can we best help them grow and help everybody love the work that they do, but and do that in a way that plays to their strengths, that plays to how they're designed, and plays to leaning into the work that they truly want to do. So I appreciate you taking the time to listen today, and I've loved sharing my journey with you, and I'd love for you to share some of your journey with me. Thanks for listening to A Leader's Journey podcast. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. If you're excited to learn more, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and tune in next week for another exciting leadership lesson. I'd love to help you level up your leadership, achieve the goals you desire, and design your unique leadership journey. So click the link in the show notes to schedule a free Level Up Your Leadership session. During this time, we will define where you are in several key areas of leadership, where you desire to be, and how you can level up your leadership. You don't need to do this alone, so let's chat today and get your journey started. Don't forget to connect with me on LinkedIn or in the A Leader's Journey community on Facebook, and share this episode with another leader so we can all learn and grow together. That's all for this episode, and I'll see you next week. Until then, lead with confidence, Show up every day as the leader you are striving to be, and make the decision today to level up your leadership this year.